I do want to go ahead and wrap with obviously, look, a little bit more college football. It's that time of year, exciting time. You know, the ratings are through the roof, as we just said. But I believe this coming Saturday in the SEC, I'm going to go ahead and call it Show Me Something Saturday. Okay, so this isn't like a full weekend preview. We'll do that on the Thursday college football betting pod. But at the same time, I believe this is Show Me Something Saturday for really two reasons. This is the first weekend all year that all 14 SEC teams are in action at the same time, okay? Now, pretty much everybody has played at least one game, but even last week, there were still some out-of-conference games, still whatever, still this, still that. So there's that element of it. But I also believe that this is the weekend where I think we learn a lot about a lot of teams that we're not quite sure on yet. And so that's why it's Show Me Something Saturday, is because are you legit? Are you not legit? Is your offense broken? Is your defense broken? What is the issue? To be clear, I don't think all 14 teams have something to show me. Like, I think if Auburn were to get destroyed by Georgia, I don't think that'd be an indictment on Hugh Freeze, this program where it is. I don't think Vanderbilt has much to show me. I think I've already seen enough of them as it is. Alabama, I think we kind of know who they are. But in my opinion, there are 7 teams that I believe, in a good way or a bad way, their entire season will start to be defined by what happens on Saturday. So let's get into it. No particular order. This isn't like ranking them from the most important to the least important, but there are 7 teams that I believe have something to show me this coming Saturday. Number 1, let's head out to Lexington, Kentucky, where the Kentucky Wildcats host the Florida Gators. Kentucky, a 2.5-point favorite in the DraftKings Sportsbook. And number 1 on this list to me is the Kentucky Wildcats, and it's because exactly what I just said. Kentucky is a 2.5-point favorite going into this game. And this is a series, and this sounds crazy, that Kentucky has largely dominated over the last couple of years. It's crazy. We went 30 years without Kentucky beating Florida. Then they beat them 2018 in the Swamp. And now they are looking for a 3-game win streak in this series. One at the Swamp 2 years ago, or one at home 2 years ago, one in the Swamp last year, and now they're going for a 3-game win streak in this series. So 1, can you get the 3-game win streak? You're favored, but 2, what's interesting to me about this game specifically is that this feels like a role reversal game from this perspective. For so many years, Florida's been the team with all the dudes and all the athletes and all the NFL guys. And Kentucky, for many years under Mark Stoops, and I'm not saying that's who they are now, but they were the physical, grinded out, low scoring. Well, you look at these two teams now, it's almost the exact opposite. It's like a Freaky Friday. They switch bodies, right? Kentucky's the one with, in my opinion, the better quarterback, Devin Leary, and the better skill position guys, Ray Davis at running back, Berrien Brown. I know in previous podcasts I've called him Berrien Browning, so forgive me, and Dane Key. I mean, Dane Key and Berrien Brown, they look like Florida receivers, and now they're on Kentucky's side. And so what I'm fascinated to see is this. Mark Stoops has done an unbelievable job through the years, kind of playing that us against the world, nobody believes in us, whatever, blah, 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 blah mentality. Well, guess what? Everybody believes in Kentucky coming into this game. I don't think anybody trusts in Florida. And so what I want to see, you beat some bad teams early. Vanderbilt stinks. Eastern Kentucky, not good. Ball State, not good. So now, who are you? Are you the team that has elevated as an entire program, 1 through 85? Or are you the team that doesn't handle pressure well? Because this is a game that you can win. I don't want to say it's definitively a game that you should win, but you probably have the more talented roster 1 through 85. So to me, maybe the most interesting team this weekend is Kentucky. 4-0 coming into this game, really handled Vanderbilt last week. Now, at home against Florida, how do you handle things? Number 2 on Show Me Something Saturday, I think it's the Florida Gators, because while Kentucky is the favorite, and I think they should be the favorite, I think there's a lot of Florida fans that are still, and I think nationally too, to be fair, you don't have to be a Florida fan. Everybody wants to know, is this program really back on the rise? Did that Tennessee game really matter? Or is that a blip in the radar, right? Because you go back to that Tennessee game for Florida a few weeks ago, it felt like kind of a pseudo perfect storm. Tennessee was undefeated, but really untested. Florida had their backs against the wall. And Florida kind of had the right game plan against the right team that night. Get the lead, keep Joe Milton off the field, keep that offense off the field, and then chew up the clock. Again, it's because they don't have the dudes that Florida usually has. But they win that game. But all the goodwill that they created coming out of that game, I think disappears if they don't win on Saturday in Lexington. Now, look, if it's 40, if it's 35-32 and both teams just play at an insane level, that's not what I'm talking about here. But what I'm talking about is if it's ugly and if it's low scoring and if Florida frankly gets blown off the field by talent, I think a lot of the people that maybe are back in Billy Napier's good corner will not be going forward. That is if they don't handle things on Saturday. Let's keep it going. Number 3, show me something Saturday. Most at stake for SEC teams. I think it's the Texas A&M Aggies in the Southwest Classic. And for people who don't follow this rivalry, this is an insane rivalry, okay? So I looked it up just for fun. The last 10 years, they play in Jerry World every year. Last 10 years, this game has been decided by a touchdown or less 6 times. It has gone to overtime 3 times. I was actually told, I haven't looked this up, that Texas A&M has trailed by a touchdown or more in 5 of those games. They're 4-1 straight up. So something crazy always happens. By the way, I looked it up for comparison's sake. You want to hear how crazy this rivalry is? Texas A&M, Arkansas, 6 games decided by a touchdown or less, 3 in overtime in the last 10 years. Michigan, Ohio State, 2 games decided by a touchdown or less, 1 overtime. So this has been a more competitive rivalry than Michigan, Ohio State. Okay. But where I think this is kind of prove it Saturday, it starts with Texas A&M, because from Texas A&M's perspective, I'll be blunt. After all the negativity around that program the last 18 months, I'm happy that they picked up that win against Auburn. But it felt like everybody was just ready. Oh, well, Texas A&M, they beat Auburn. They got it all figured out. It's like, no, Auburn is very much in year 1 of a rebuild under Hugh Freeze. They were on the road. It was record-setting temperatures. I think they said it was the second hottest game at Kyle Field in the history of Texas A&M football. Auburn has no depth because of basically Brian Harsin stopped recruiting, if we're being honest about it. And so A&M wins that game, and everyone's like, oh, A&M, they might be onto something. And they might be. They were also up 6-3 at halftime. Connor Wigman's hurt. We don't know if he's coming back for this game or not. And it just felt like everyone's been out on A&M for 2 years. Then it's just like they're right back in. I don't know if I trust them. I need to see it. Now, by the way, you go out and you win this game because, by the way, you're the more talented team. You probably have one of the 3-4 most talented rosters in college football. You go out and win this game 27-7, then yeah, like we need to take you seriously as a contender in the SEC West, believe it or not, with Alabama coming to town next week. But also, wouldn't it be so on brand for Texas A&M with Alabama coming to town next week to overlook Arkansas, either lose or at the very least, almost certainly go deep into the fourth quarter in a close game? Let's stay with this game because I think Arkansas has something to prove as well. From the Arkansas perspective, I don't know if I'm the only one that watches these games, but I loved Arkansas last week against LSU as a 17.5-point underdog. I said, Arkansas's not bad. They just commit a lot of really, really dumb penalties. 14 penalties against BYU, then another 11 against LSU. But that LSU game was there for the winning. That BYU game was there for the winning, and Arkansas has to clean some stuff up. I think what's interesting about Arkansas is it's a little bit about what I said with Kentucky and Florida. Completely different team with completely kind of different personnel than in years past. They rely heavily on KJ Jefferson. They don't rely on the run game. I know Rocket Sanders has been injured, but this has been a team that has dominated the line of scrimmage that hasn't really had much success this year. But it doesn't change the fact that a couple less penalties, couple less dumb self-inflicted mistakes, they could be 4-0 and frankly, probably in the top 15 to 20 heading into this game. So A&M or Arkansas has a lot to prove as well. They got to get back on track, and all these games have been winnable. They're not a laughing stock. They're not an embarrassment. They're not even bad, but these are games you got to win. Let's keep it going. 2 more teams from one specific matchup that I want to get to. I want to get to 3 more teams, but the last kind of big matchup that I want to get to, I think LSU at Ole Miss is show me something Saturday for sure. From the LSU perspective, again, I kind of nailed it. I was like, I'm not sold that LSU has suddenly figured things out because they beat a bad Mississippi State team 2 weeks ago. Well, you go back to last week, that game in Death Valley at night was easily a game Arkansas could have won. And when I look at LSU, I like pieces, but I still don't see special, right? Like you watch Alabama, the quarterback, we kind of know, but you see that defense, it's like dudes are flying everywhere. You're like, oh my God, this defense is awesome. Obviously, a Georgia, a Texas, you can see it. LSU, you see little pieces. Harold Perkins here, Malik Neighbors, the wide receiver, Brian Thomas, the wide receiver. I don't know that I see special across the board. But at the same time, Brian Kelly came here to put together an upper echelon SEC roster. And let's call a spade a spade. If you're Brian Kelly, if you're building a national championship caliber program, it's a game you should win. Ole Miss, I think they're pretty good, but they haven't been great this year. They didn't look great last year. And even in the portal rebuild, whatever, you still probably have more talent than them across the board. So I think LSU can make a huge statement. Go to Ole Miss and dominate, and I think we feel really good about you. Go to Ole Miss and lose, then it's like, man, because they could have lost last week to Arkansas. I still think they have a lot to prove. Wrapping up with two more teams. The first one is Ole Miss. Listen, I was on Ole Miss last week as well. I said, they're not beating Alabama. Like, everyone's like, oh, Lane Kiffin's going to be the one to put the final nail in Nick Saban's coffin. I was like, really? Have we watched Ole Miss? Ole Miss struggled to put away Tulane on the road with backup quarterback, and they struggled to beat Georgia Tech at home. I mean, they didn't struggle, but it was 17-3 going into the fourth quarter. And so you see all of these big, bold offensive statistics, and it was mostly late in games. And really, for the first three quarters of basically the last, the two games before SEC play, they struggled to move the ball. And so I'm not sold that Jackson Dart is the guy. I've never been sold that Jackson Dart is the guy because Lane Kiffin went out and got two transfer quarterbacks last offseason. What's interesting, though, I saw this. You Google Lane Kiffin. There's an article in the local newspaper. It's called the Clarion Ledger. And it basically says, like, Lane Kiffin, we're paying you $8 million right now. This isn't like the feel-good, plucky underdog story anymore. You got to start producing. And what I find interesting, I think everybody likes Kiffin because he says stuff and he's goofy on social media. I went back and looked because I was curious. Ole Miss went 8-5 last year. Remember, they started 7-1. They're 3-1 this year. Here's who Ole Miss has beaten since the start of last season: Troy, Georgia Tech, Central Arkansas, Tulsa, Kentucky, Vandy, Auburn, A&M last year. So of those 8 wins last year, they started 7-0. The only win they got after their 7-0 start was against a Texas A&M team that was historically bad. They also beat 3 teams that ended up firing their coaches: Georgia Tech, Tulsa, and Auburn. This year, their wins are against Georgia Tech again, Tulane, and Mercer. So what would you say is the best win that Ole Miss has had the last 2 years? Probably against a Kentucky team that went 7-5. Like, that's their best win. Well, again, Lane Kiffin, you're an $8 million a year head coach now. It's easy to be the plucky little guy when you're making $4 million and Nick Saban's making 12, but you're making 8 now. You're in the big boy, big tax bracket league. These are some of these games you got to start winning. I'm not saying you got to win all of them. I know Ole Miss's history. I know that LSU is not a team that historically Ole Miss has had success against. But man, oh man, oh man. Again, Lane Kiffin, $8 million, you got to take care of business. Finally, let's wrap one more team that I think we're going to learn a lot about this week. Ironically, Lane Kiffin's former team, the Tennessee Volunteers. And what's interesting to me about Tennessee, I just think this is the week we start to learn, like, what's going on with this team with Joe Milton, right? Because it's interesting, knowing the fan bases like I do, and I don't claim to know everybody, but Tennessee, it feels like, for a team that is 3-1 and ranked in the top 25, fan base is frustrated. And the fan base is frustrated, I believe, because they don't believe that Joe Milton's the guy. And so there's some frustration about, how did we get in this situation? Why did we not, how is there not somebody else ready to go? Obviously, they have the 5-star freshman, Nico. I'm not even going to try to say his name. We all know who Nico is. But I think we all kind of understand he's probably not ready to be thrown into the fire in the SEC. But I think that fan base is a little bit frustrated. And so you're at home, you play South Carolina. That's a game you got to win, and you got to win looking good. Because South Carolina, respectfully, I think Shane Beamer's done a good job. They're certainly a bottom-of-the-half SEC team, and that's a team that Tennessee should beat. So it'll be interesting to see, but I would argue Tennessee has a lot at stake this weekend. By the way, schedule does not get any easier. They get a bye. Then they have A&M at home, Alabama on the road, Kentucky on the road. So it doesn't get any easier. Although, thankfully for Tennessee, they do have the UConn Huskies coming in November, so they can get right at that point. But again, it's not going to get easier for Tennessee. You got to win this game.